This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek and Pacifica, and we've been covering the struggle of working people, labor in Africa, and recently in Kenya, there's been a massive protest movement as well as a strike by the Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists, and Dentists Union. And today we're joined with Mercy Mabwirer, who is a national treasurer of that union. Welcome to our show, Mercy.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to, shed some light on what's happening in Kenya, what's been happening there, and how it's really impacting Kenyan workers. Yeah, and how it's playing into this whole global, issues that are just emerging across the globe with us facing austerity measures and very bad policies that are very anti-people. Yeah.
Well, your union recently called a national strike. Why don't you talk about why you called that strike, what the issues were in that strike, and what happened during the strike?
All right. So I'll start by giving a brief history of our union, which is just around 13 years old now. It's the first doctors union in Kenya, was founded in 2011. We've had 3 successful nationwide strikes. This was the third one that lasted 56 days. Our strikes have been around getting recognition by government, who's been the major employer of doctors in the country. Our second strike was about getting our collective contracts or CBS signed. And this strike was really about having that contract implemented by government. But it was triggered by 2 events. So one event that triggered it and made us call for it at the time when we called for it was one, the government has always had the responsibility of training medical doctors. And this means that they're responsible for ensuring that they are placed, they get internship placements, and then they are paid for the work that they do during their internship. However, with this new administration, they've had these efforts to, first of all, degrade the entire internship training process by calling our doctors who have graduated not doctors, but rather students, but at the same time still expecting them to provide direct patient care and take responsibility for patient outcomes. Of course, we did not agree to this because within our collective agreement, we have clear, agreements on who a medical intern is, what is expected of them, but also what the employer's obligations are towards the intern. And so the government, in a very sneaky, malicious way, decided to reduce the interns' salaries by a whopping 70%. And issued letters to place these interns with that salary deduction. We did not agree with that move. And so we called for mass demonstrations and protests across the country to call the government to order. Now, during one of these protests, of course, we are dealing with a very repressive regime in Kenya. Our Secretary General was shot at by a tear gas canister that hit his head, got him injured. He had suffered massive brain injuries. And so it is in the background of this that we realized that this is a government that will not implement our collective agreement, not just the part about the interns, but they had reneged on everything that we had agreed on. And they were continuing to oppress and suppress us. And so the second thing that triggered the strike, so there was the shooting of our Secretary General, and mainly because the interns were not going to be placed and paid their salaries as was agreed. But secondly, it's because of the measures, the austerity measures that the government had undertaken, including increasing taxes and introducing new taxes without public participation, and directly going ahead to begin deducting those taxes from our salaries. And so we had moved to court as a union to challenge that. We got a court ruling that declared those new taxes, housing levy tax, a new health tax that was declared unconstitutional. But the government refused to stop the deductions. And so we went on strike demanding that the government respects court orders, adheres to them, and implements them. So two things concerning our CBA, but in the grand scheme, the new taxes and the new austerity measures that they were introducing that were clearly unconstitutional. And so we called for a strike, a nationwide strike on 13th of March, having these demands amongst other demands. Of course, our main demands were centered around what had not been implemented in a collective agreement, including the issue about taxation that was really affecting not just doctors in Kenya, but all public service workers employed by government at all levels. Yeah.
And the issue of privatization and austerity of public services, is this an important issue in Kenya?
Oh, this is a very important issue in Kenya. And when you see, for example, our strike that we went on the 56-day long strike, we've had other healthcare workers going on strike in the country, the clinical officers who in the US are equivalent to physician assistants, just ended their 95-day long strike. And so the health sector is facing a lot of protests, a lot of strikes by health workers, and it's being driven by the massive privatization of healthcare that's being undertaken in our country that is having this ripple effect on public services, because now that our government is actively pursuing the privatization of healthcare, it has reduced its focus and funding of the public health sector. And so we are seeing deteriorating standards in terms of patient care, in terms of availability of services, but also in how the healthcare workers are being treated. And so it's a perennial problem that keeps growing over the years. Every year we are having strikes, we are having issues. Coupled with that is massive corruption in government, in the health sector, where government is entering into these very crazy deals with corporations from rich countries to invest in healthcare infrastructure and buy equipment that are obsolete, that are not useful to us. But really, privatization of healthcare in Kenya is something that is totally changing the healthcare landscape in the country and having devastating impacts on patients and also on workers. And it's not being done directly, that government is selling out, that government or public healthcare facilities are being taken over by private facilities. No, it is in the legislation, in the policies that are being adopted right now in the country that have caused an increase and sort of monopolization of healthcare provisioning. Just 10 years ago, 70% of healthcare provisioning in Kenya was publicly managed. Right now, the statistics have changed, and 60% of healthcare provisioning in Kenya is being managed privately.
And as you know, in the United States, you have private control of healthcare, and there are millions of people without healthcare. It's the highest cause of bankruptcy for people in the United States, not being able to pay their healthcare bills. Are you saying that now American and European companies are trying to do the same thing in Kenya that has been happening in the United States?
Yes, we have clearly, and it's been documented. Now we have, I think, 3 reports that have been made public about the involvement of US-based private equity firms development finance institutions, the International Finance Corporation, investing in healthcare in Kenya, but not just investing, but actually financializing the privatization of healthcare in Kenya. And these investments are really coming with a lot of challenges because of the type of management models that they are introducing into the healthcare setting in Kenya. So first of all, 80% of Kenyans still depend and rely on healthcare, publicly funded healthcare, because we only have a very limited healthcare insurance cover by the National Health Insurer. But what we are now seeing in Kenya is these hospitals that were once small and very isolated, they are now merging and, into groups of hospitals that are centrally managed and have they just have management practices that are not anything near what has been the practice in Kenya. But we feel like what has been happening in the US is being exported into our countries. And the unfortunate thing is they're extracting profits from poor people, because even those who patronize these hospitals either have to exhaust their insurance cover or pay out of pocket. And there are already reports out there in the public of what's happening in these hospitals, how patients are being detained for days in hospitals, how dead bodies are being detained in hospitals, and families being made to fundraise to pay very huge hospital bills. We are already having reports about workers, healthcare workers being given targets. You have to make this number of, you have to request this number of tests, you have to, prescribe this kind of medications if you're to get your salary at the end of the day. But worse off is the kind of labor practices that we are seeing. For the very first time in our country, we are having very highly skilled doctors being employed on extremely short-term contracts. 1 week, 1 day, show up to work, do your work, go back home, get paid at the end of the day. You get a 1-month contract and it's reviewed at the end of the month. Did you meet our targets? How many patients did you admit? How much drugs did you, prescribe? How many tests did you request? If you did not meet our targets, go home. We are getting someone else on board. And this is happening, and some of them are giving contracts that are very explicit. You are employed on a short-term contract and you're not allowed to become, join a union or become a member of a union. Now, these are management practices that are very unique to our setting, because traditionally healthcare has been one of those sectors in the country that are considered sensitive and also guarantee human security. But this new model that is very profit-focused, that has commercialized, patients, is just bringing with it a lot of challenges, even for our own doctors, who are now, in addition to having to struggle to survive, are also having to deal mentally with this dehumanization that's going on. And this practice, these investments are supported by development finance institutions, by World Bank, by the International Finance Corporation, which has supported the Kenyan government to come up with reports that demonstrate the business opportunities in healthcare in Kenya for investors to come and invest. They have published these reports. They have invited investors to come on board. And now we have healthcare corporations from the US investing massively in Kenya. Private equity firms from the US-based private equity firms investing in Kenya, carrying out the profits that they're making and taking them to their stock, to the New York Stock Exchange. They're not investing whatever it is in Kenya. They have had our government, our legislatures pass legislation that allows them to evade taxation and just make profit. They get away with it because we as a country have very weak enforcement, capacity. We have labor laws, we have laws that protect health, patients, we have laws that protect workers, but it's very difficult for a poor country such as ours to fully enforce some of these laws. Our labor inspectorate unit is poorly resourced. In a city like Nairobi that has 5 million people, we only have one labor inspector who's responsible for inspecting every workplace in the entire city every day and reporting and enforcing. It's not possible. And so that is how these weaknesses, these loopholes in our mechanisms are being exploited, by these profiteers, and they're just getting, they're just reaping. But this kind of thing is now manifesting in the kind of unrest that we are seeing in Kenya's health sector, because the public sector, due to underfunding, is collapsing. But Kenyans cannot afford the alternative, which is private healthcare. They cannot. And I talked about corruption, very rampant in the health sector. And why am I saying that? We have a national health insurance fund that is public, that collects funds from the public. So public servants are deducted a monthly amount of money that goes into that insurance. Informal workers contribute a certain amount every month. But up until this year, the report that comes out of the National Hospital Insurance Fund demonstrate that the fund pays more reimbursements to private healthcare facilities as opposed to public healthcare facilities. And these facilities negotiate the reimbursements. They renegotiate rates directly with the National Hospital Insurance Fund. So we're seeing public money going directly into private, these private facilities. And so they don't care whether a poor person cannot come to pay. They just are guaranteed that even if you will not pay, that little money that is guaranteed for you in the National Health Insurance Fund will come to them. And once it's exhausted, you go look for care elsewhere. They're done with you. They cannot admit you. They cannot provide care. They cannot do anything. And that is why, first of all, they are turning away emergencies. If you cannot pay an admission fee, you will not get emergency care. Secondly, if you're unable to pay your hospital bills, they detain you. They'll detain your dead person until you raise money as a community, come and pay them, and then get discharged, And so it's an extremely dangerous undertaking. It's an extremely dangerous experimentation for us in our poor country, because now we are having a mental health crisis amongst our healthcare workers. It's overwhelming. I talked to our doctors who are in the private sector. The last time we had a meeting with them, they were like, our sector is brutal. You have got to figure out how to survive in this sector as a healthcare worker, as a doctor. And this is a doctor, a specialist who's telling you, I am afraid of I'm even afraid of talking about the union, because if they get wind of this, I'll go home and I won't have a job at the end of the day. Yeah.
Well, with contracting out, it's a means of breaking unions, contract labor.
Yes.
And that's going on all over South Africa, Namibia, all over Africa.
Exactly. And these are things that we were not used to. I mean, so look at a country like Kenya that does not have adequate enough number of doctors. The practice has always been to employ them on a permanent and retain them, okay, so that they can be able to, provide this care continuously. And so this is a very strange practice where a doctor gets employed for 1 week or gets employed for, and they're really making the standards, the labor standards really come very, very, very low.
And there is also a rebellion going on, which has shocked a lot of people in
Yes.
Kenya. Maybe you can talk about what that is,
yes,
what led to it.
I'm very excited to talk about that. As you can know, a lot of our countries are struggling with debt and repayment of debt, especially post-COVID, when their attempts at having the debts restructured to allow for our economies to recover were actually not thwarted by IMF and World Bank. Kenya has been, paying these debts, I mean, since we got independence and everything, but with the new administration that came on board, they negotiated new loans with the IMF and with World Bank that came with certain stringent measures. These measures, one that has triggered these protests is just taxation, increasing taxes. And it's not just increasing taxes in a way that the economy is going to recover, but it's taxing every single thing that is necessary for survival, okay? So all the all the products that were, tax exempt, that did not attract value-added taxation, so basic commodities such as milk, bread, water, all these things, VAT was reintroduced and increased from 16% to 18%. Motor vehicle taxation, all subsidies were lifted. So no subsidies in education. Parents had to go back to paying huge amounts of fees. So cost of education has went up. Subsidies in healthcare got removed. Free maternity programs were, so now mothers, when they have to give birth, they have to pay out of pocket or get some form of insurance. And so they did away with all these social, systems that had been put in place to support the very poor, to support the middle class, to survive in Kenya. And this government just kept pushing through without public participation, without listening to the voice of people in the country. The workers were speaking through their unions. Civil society organizations were raising these concerns. Youth groups across the country were crying about unemployment. But what was the government doing in return? Signing bilateral labor agreements to send Kenyans to the Gulf countries to go and slave away, without guaranteeing them, protection of their rights, forcing institutions to massively produce workers in huge numbers so that they can be exported to these foreign countries under very difficult conditions. The pressure kept building up. And so last year we had a finance bill which was signed into an act. We made a lot of noise about it. It was ignored. This year, the new finance bill that was proposed without public participation was even worse, was going to make it difficult for any Kenyan to own a vehicle. Because in addition to paying taxes on fuel, taxes on the road that you use, you had to pay now tax on the vehicle that you have already bought and paid tax on it, a yearly tax. They introduced a tax on bread. They introduced taxes like everything. And then, even what was quite scary was that the tax base was expanded to include even the unemployed. So they were like, as long as you're 18 years old, there's a tax that you have to be paying because you're in Kenya, okay? So they, in the name of expanding the tax base, they went for the informal workers. They went for everything within, everything in the economy, including taxing subsistence farmers, agriculture. If you're producing food for your own consumption, you'd have to pay taxes on it. I mean, these measures were really bad, but we also saw a lot of influence by multinational corporations, because we saw the US ambassador coming out very strongly and telling us as Kenyans that we need to accept and embrace this finance bill because it is good for us. It is going to attract a lot of US investors to come and invest in Kenya. And so we went back to look at it. What is this that is in this bill that will attract US investors? And you will not believe it, that while Kenyans were being burdened with taxes for the very basic commodities, investors need not, like any foreign investments were tax-free in the country. There were a lot of tax exemptions for foreign investments, for new technologies, for all these things, And so we were just like, no, this is not how we want the country run. But at the same time, as these austerity measures are being imposed again upon we, the poor Kenyans, the political class was doing the opposite, buying very expensive vehicles, living large, splashing money all over, taking, like living in opulence. And we just had about enough. And this movement just arose of people saying, we don't want that finance bill. We want to be involved in these conversations about our money in this country. We are not going to have the US government. We are not going to have IMF. We are not going to have World Bank dictate to us how our economy is going to be run. And we tried to lobby in so many ways to have that finance bill not passed by parliament. But you know that even our parliament in Kenya is compromised. It serves the executive. It doesn't serve the people when it's supposed to serve people. And so, of course, protests began. People organized. The first one, there was a petition that was signed by close to 10 million Kenyans petitioning Parliament to not assent to that, to not pass that bill. They didn't listen, and in the first reading, the bill went through, and that's what triggered the nationwide protests. And as the nationwide protests against the finance bill picked up, and along with it came questions about governance and democracy in the country and political patronage. And so that's why even tomorrow, the world is going to see that those protests are still continuing, because the people's demands have not been met. Today, as we are talking, the president lied that they have rejected the finance bill, but the cost of fuel has gone up, as was proposed in that bill. And so we are just dealing with a lot of, but I saw yesterday IMF wrote that they're willing to negotiate restructuring of the loans that they have given Kenya in light of the recent happenings.
And does Kenya have a political opposition? Is there a Labor Party? Is there a Workers' Party to represent the working people of Kenya?
No, Kenya doesn't have a Workers' Party or a Labor Party. It does have opposition, which after the last general elections has been weakened by by just bribery, So a lot of the opposition members of parliament, after the failed protests immediately after election, decided to join this ruling regime, to be on their side. because they're given money. Okay. Even to pass this bill, the members of parliament have come out openly and said we were each paid 2 million shillings.
So bribery. So there's bribery going on.
Bribery, yes, there's bribery. There's a lot of bribery that's going on that has compromised the power of the opposition party in Kenya. And that is why you see this vacuum that had been left was quickly filled up by this, movement that are calling themselves Gen Z, Generation Z, and it's mostly young people, young girls who are leading it. And of course, they're getting support from civil society organizations, but generally led by the young people who are just having these demands about, we want good governance, we want democracy, we want to do away with corruption, we are tired of bribery, we want the president to go. He sacked his entire cabinet. As a result of that, in the last elections, though, the workers under the umbrella of the Central Confederation of all unions supported the current opposition leader. So we threw our support behind Raila Odinga, who has been running for elections every year. And our hope was that this time round, because we knew what this particular party represented and what their aspirations were. And we knew they were very anti-worker and very anti-people. And so we supported the opposition as a labor movement. But we did not have a role, a clear, distinct role for even what will be our position after the elections. And unfortunately, we lost. And after losing that election, I think the labor movement just retreated back to self-preservation as a whole. And a few militant unions have remained, actively pushing back against these anti-workers, anti-people policies and laws that are just being passed across the country and practices by government. But the labor movement in Kenya just retreated after that loss and retreated into a self-preservation mode. That's what I call it.
And this rebellion now that's developed in Kenya, what potential is there of there being a political development? Because, I mean, it seems like the political parties are not saying, as you have said, we have to end the IMF and the World Bank austerity measures. We have to end dependence on U.S. multinationals and foreign investors. We have to put our resources to the betterment of the people, to public health and public services.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's an opportunity. That's what some of us are actually trying to work on right now, how to organize, turn whatever is happening right now and organize for that transformation that we want. Because as I told you, the existing political parties appear to have been compromised through bribery. They stopped, raising these issues. Amongst them, we have leaders who have been consistent in raising these issues. But we are seeing a political formation. It's in its very nascent stages. We cannot say much about it, but we are seeing that formation happening and really centered around principles of socialism, having a welfare state rather than a capitalist state that we are currently dealing it. How that will go, I am not really sure, because I want to confess that the protests came and everything, but we have not been organizing. Like, we were not properly organized, even as a labor movement in Kenya, to seize this opportunity. For us as a union, we seized an opportunity within it because it was led by young people, because it's the young people. We chose to, within it, push for the placement of our interns. Within this movement, we've been able to make demands that the sanctity of our collective bargaining agreement is upheld. And we have been able to be successful with that because the interns got their placement letters on Friday. with the new salaries. But within it, we also developed our own movement that distinguishes us, called the Medics for Kenya, that really shows that we as healthcare providers, we are pro-Kenyans, and we want that which works for Kenya. And so within the Medics for Kenya movement, we are trying now to, build these alliances to have in this new formation that is taking place. We don't want to be left out. We are going in as Medics for Kenyans rather than as an entire labor movement. Because again, as I said, due to self-preservation, some unions are sitting on the fence on this one.
And this is a global issue. Privatization of healthcare is not unique to Kenya. It's happened in the United States and South Africa, Europe, with the NHS being privatized. What can healthcare workers do internationally? And what would you like to say to American healthcare workers about your struggle and the need to fight internationally against the attacks on healthcare workers and privatization?
Thank you so much for that question, because this is something I've been talking about. Currently, I'm interning with the Committee of Interns and Residents at ACIU. I'm doing my internship with them. I'm working with some organizing committees in hospitals with doctors. And and in my organizing work, even as I'm trying to work together with them to win a union, I keep telling them the win should not stop at this space here, because this is a space that should catalyze change in the in the bigger ecosystem, the global healthcare ecosystem. And for me, my desire, because I not only represent doctors in Kenya, but I also work with other healthcare workers within East African countries. And we are making efforts within that network to build solidarity across our borders and bring our anti-privatization campaigns to the East Africa platform and move it to the Africa platform. And I would really like to see other healthcare unions across the globe, the global north to south collaborations. We want to see more north to north collaborations fighting privatization, because workers in the global north, I'm sorry to say this, because they accepted it. Because they have accepted it, that is why those who are pushing for it have become emboldened and are exporting these same things to our country. And so resistance from our end, as we are resisting, must also be met with resistance from this other end. And then together we build, a massive, powerful movement that is just anti-privatization of healthcare, underpinned by, solid principles of how you cannot make healthcare a profiteering venture, and how dangerous it is to people and how dangerous it is to, society at large. But we want to see that kind of collaboration happening. ACIU CIR is supporting us with their tools, their resources, and with them to just try and understand the kind of management practices that are, that are being exported to us, and how labor in this setting has tried to maneuver and still organize within those difficult circumstances. And so we are appreciating that support. I am glad that, I'm learning how to organize, but what I wouldn't like to do is to accept that this is the new normal. What I wouldn't like us to accept is that this is what we have to live with. We acknowledge the reality of it, but for me, we must resist. Like healthcare workers across the world must resist it.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Mercy Mabwirer, and she's with the Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists, and Dentists Union. She's a national treasurer, and she's been talking about the struggle to protect healthcare for the people of Kenya against privatization, contracting out, and the rebellion that's taken place in Kenya over the taxes and the basic attacks on poor people, working people, unemployed, and farmers. So thanks for joining us. And this is obviously important to American workers and healthcare workers who face similar attacks on their conditions.
Solidarity is how we win this war.
What's the condition of the president of the union, your president, who was hit by this gas?
He had massive injuries to the brain was affected. He now has to be permanently on anticonvulsants. If he misses his meds, he can just, convulse out of the blues. I mean, it was intended to, intimidate him, to threaten him, to stop him. However, as a union, we are very happy because even in these ongoing protests, he has been at the forefront of it. He's recovered his health, he's still on medication, and he's still very much in the struggle.
And what can people do to support your union and defend it? Can they send money or resources?
Yes. So we currently have, so the other thing that we struggle a lot with as a union is resources, because we largely depend on our membership dues. A lot of our members, 90% of our members are public sector workers. So when we go on strike against government, they stop those deductions. The government literally stops the deductions and starves the union. And now we have to figure out how we can raise funds to run our operations, run our strike successfully, run some of these activities that we do. So we will very much appreciate financial resources in a very big way. We are trying to build our communications capacity because we believe that this information needs to go out there. It needs to be properly packaged, properly framed, so that the messaging is very clear. We, as I said, we are also trying to build that capacity because we lack it. And so we will also appreciate any organization, anybody who can support our comms, and most importantly, help us disseminate this information. We will be launching a report in August, which exposes development finance institutions, which exposes governments in the global north that have entered into these deals that are, extracting money from our health sector and just messing it up. And our hope is to bring this report to a global platform so that people can begin interacting with it and raising questions in the right forums. So our hope is that we will be able to share this report, and our partners, our friends, other healthcare workers can interact with it and also just help us, platform it and disseminate it to other unions, other workers, just anywhere where that information can get to, can make sense, and can bring about change.
Okay, well, thank you very much again, and we'll help get this out. I think the solidarity with Kenyan healthcare workers is critical. Helping and struggling with the healthcare workers in Kenya is helping with workers in the United States who face the same attack of privatization and contracting out. It's the same struggle.
Because we are the same. We are facing the same monster.
The same monster. Okay.
Same monster.
Very good. Take care.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was such a pleasure talking with you.